Hello, my name is Cliff Bogart. I'm with the Vanguard Commercial Group. I'm a commercial real estate broker with over 40 years experience. And today we're going to talk about the top 5 things you need to know before you decide to renew or relocate. So we're going to jump right in and let's start with number one. Number one, this is a time consuming process. At least it is if you're going to do it right. So you should start at least 6 to 9 months prior to your current lease expiration. I suppose you could wait till the last minute and sign a renewal with your current landlord, but any negotiating leverage you have is pretty much shot at that time. If you do decide to relocate or you want to compare possible relocation sites versus renewing, what you're talking about is a competitive bidding process, and that involves identifying the spaces that you could potentially move to, touring, qualifying them, getting competitive proposals, as well as getting a competitive proposal, or certainly from the landlord's point of view, you need to make them understand that you are considering other alternatives, but to get a competitive proposal, hopefully, from the landlord as well. And now you have some negotiating leverage, you have some other proposals to compare against, and the landlord knows that if they aren't competitive, you do have some other alternatives that you could choose. So you really need to allow enough time to be able to see and evaluate everything that could potentially suit the tenant, the client, meet their needs, and to allow for that competitive bidding process, which often takes weeks and requires additional investigations such as construction pricing and in space planning and such. The next item is an item where many people make a mistake. They know they have a renewal option or believe they have a renewal option, but they fail to check the option notification date, the renewal option notification date. And very often the renewal option notification date and the process is very, very specific. That the intent to renew or the intent to exercise that option must be given in a certain manner, typically written, very often may even further indicate that it must be registered mail or some other method of delivery, and that the notice must be received at least 180 days prior to the termination date of the lease. And it may have additional provisions, or actually, more often, the problem is it doesn't have any additional provisions other than the process and how the landlord is going to determine market rate. And typically, there's a little bit of flexibility in being able to discuss what is a real market rate, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because that can be very complex negotiations. Landlord hires an appraiser, tenant hires an appraiser, the two appraisers hire an appraiser, but that's not really the point of this video. However, the renewal option often doesn't include any provisions for updating operating expenses, operating expense base year, if there is an expense stop, as well as any refurbishment allowance or tenant improvement allowance. These are all items to be negotiated. And some renewal options allow for some negotiation, but many don't. And a tenant could find themselves in a position of, in effect, voiding their option to renew by entering into a brand new complete negotiation. Now, often this occurs and nobody really knows or nobody really cares because the landlord's motivated to renew the tenant's motivated to renew, so the tenant proceeds as though they are exercising their renewal option when in fact, technically they might not. It only becomes a problem if the tenant wants to renew, but for some reason the landlord does not want to renew the tenant. Then by not doing it properly, this could give the landlord an opportunity to not renew the tenant, to say you've by taking these actions or not meeting this notification date, you have failed to properly exercise your option to renew. Therefore, I'm going to ask you to leave at the end of your term because that big tenant that's right next to you in the building wants your space. Next, think about, has your business changed since your last lease, and how's that impact your use of space? Are you going to fewer private offices and more open space? Are you changing departments or the way the departments interact with each other? This is your best shot at getting either from your current landlord an allowance to rework, reconstruct, refurbish the space to accommodate your current use, or an opportunity for you to, if it's not possible where you are or not economically possible where you are, to relocate to another building and be able to build the space, customize it exactly for your use. Also evaluating how much space do you need. Do I need as much space? Do I need more space? Does this new configuration mean that I can get by with less space? Or more people working from home now? So maybe people who had private offices and they're working from home, maybe we only need to have a workstation, or maybe we only need to have a few workstations to accommodate all of the people working from home. This is your opportunity to make that change that could impact your bottom line for the next 5 years if you sign a 5-year lease, or longer if you sign a longer term lease. So all of these factors need to be taken into account because they can have long-term cost implications, as well as just the efficient functioning of your office operation. You need to understand or hire someone who does understand what the market conditions are. What are market rental rates? What are market concessions? Are there concessions such as free rent or additional above standard tenant improvement allowances? What are the clauses that can typically be negotiated in your market at this time versus other times? So, for instance, in a down or depressed market, or a market with a lot of vacancy, landlords are going to be a lot more willing to make concessions that they otherwise wouldn't make in a strong market, or strong certainly from the landlord's perspective. And so understanding the market and then going out and touring, identifying and touring competitive spaces, getting competitive proposals, all feed back into that competitive bidding process. So again, whether you're going to renew or relocate, understanding the market, getting competitive bids for your very significant business, because signing a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year lease, that's a significant financial contract for a landlord to capture, and it adds value to that landlord's property. So you're in a very strong negotiating position when you're out in the market, letting other owners compete for your business. And then finally, as you may have gathered through all of this, it's a complex, time-consuming process. There are many things other than just rent or tenant improvement allowance or operating expenses and lease structures and other clauses and provisions that will greatly impact the cost of occupancy over the term of the lease that must be taken into consideration. If you're a tenant, you need to hire that expertise unless you want to spend an inordinate amount of time researching it yourself and giving yourself an education, if you will. But if that's not your primary business, and most of the time it isn't, you really need to hire someone who understands the market, who can facilitate this process from start to finish, identifying properties, helping you determine what your needs are, going out into the market, and again, identifying those properties that could meet your needs, setting up tours, gathering proposals, analyzing and comparing proposals to make sure that at the end of this process, whether you renew or whether you relocate, you have or you feel comfortable that I've seen everything out there that could be seen. I've investigated all the possible economic lease terms that are available in this market. And I feel comfortable in my decision to renew or relocate, whichever that might be, that I'm making a good decision and I'm getting the best possible terms that the market will allow for my requirement today in this market. Well, I hope you found this helpful. Again, my name is Cliff Bogart. I'm with the Vanguard Commercial Group, and we will have other videos in the future, so stay tuned.